I'm in another location. So what? This is not the normal kind of content that I make on this channel, but it's my channel and I do what I want, so here we are. I've made it clear over the past couple videos, and also the last 22 years of my life, that I freaking love Power Rangers. Go, go, Power Rangers! And yesterday we got the news that the Disney Plus Power Rangers reboot is no longer moving forward due to budgetary reasons. The show was going to be showrun by the guys behind the Percy Jackson show. It sounded like something really interesting and cool that I would have been into for sure, and I hope now that it's over, we can at least maybe get some details on what the plot would have been. And, like, I could have just made a video yesterday that explained everything I'm talking about in, like, 20 seconds and gotten it out very quickly, but I don't really like to do super reactionary content like that. I prefer to have, like, things to say in my videos and more of an informed opinion. I've spent the last literally 24 hours thinking about this. Not to say that the people who made those reactionary news videos had no opinions in their videos. I'm just saying I wanted to take more time than, like, a couple hours to post a video. You do you, get your bag. We all have to eat, all right? So what are we going to talk about in this video? Normally I do a big, long history segment, and you know what? I will do that, actually. I'll explain the entire history of Power Rangers. How's that sound? I'm not going to do that. There are lots of videos about the history of Power Rangers, and if you know me in real life, you've probably heard me talk about this. What I'm going to talk about is the last, like, decade-ish of Power Rangers history. A little bit longer than a decade, but basically a decade. I want to talk about the various attempts at Power Rangers reboots at this point, and then I'm going to talk about why I think it might be time for Power Rangers to take a break. Like, a conscious break, not just like, oh, we're trying to start something, and then we don't. And then it's years of that, like Hasbro themselves decide, okay, we're just gonna let this sit and fester for a little bit. Like, needs to be a conscious decision. Power Rangers is dead. Again. So for anyone who doesn't know, Power Rangers has almost been canceled something like 5 times. Let's see, it was almost canceled during In Space, and then In Space did crazy and they renewed it for another season. Wild Force was meant to be the end, but then Disney bought the Fox Kids network and they moved production to New Zealand. Jungle Fury was going to be the end, but the contract with Bandai had not ended yet, so they had contractually to make another season, or else Bandai was just going to produce toys anyway. RPM was meant to be the final original season because Disney had no interest in funding the show anymore. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers 2010 was a re-edit of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Season 1 so that Bandai could continue to sell toys and that there was a show on the air to advertise them, but they never finished that. Haim Saban bought the show back in the 2010s, and then in 2011 we got Power Rangers Samurai. And then in 2017, after the critical and box office failure of the Power Rangers movie, which also affected the toy sales, like Power Rangers Super Ninja Steel had lower toy sales because the Power Rangers brand was just hurt by that movie. Saban sold the Master Toy license, as well as the Master IP license, to Hasbro. Now, at the time, Hasbro was run by a gentleman named Brian Goldner, who was a longtime personal friend of Haim Saban. And it seemed like Goldner had these really big, expansive ideas for the show and how the brand was going to exist in the 2020s. Unfortunately, in 2021, Goldner passed away, and he was replaced by current CEO of Hasbro, Chris Cox, who I've talked about before, I believe. In outlining this, you can clearly see Power Rangers has defeated death many times. It's almost ridiculous that the show ran for 30 years unbroken, and that's something I'll talk about a lot more later. Anyway, after the 2017 movie came out, but before we realized it was a big box office bomb and also did not sell enough toys or Krispy Kreme to warrant a sequel, Saban and Lionsgate supposedly had 6 sequels ready, or, like, planned. But because that movie didn't perform the way that they wanted it to, all those plans were ended. So after Hasbro obtains the property, they decide to modernize it, to bring it into the 21st century. Power Rangers has effectively been the same show since 1993. You take the Sentai footage, you mix it with some very green actors, and you get a whole new show. It's made for literal pennies on the dollar because all the fight scenes are shot in advance in a different country, and all production is done in New Zealand. It's far cheaper to shoot in New Zealand. It's far cheaper to hire New Zealand actors. The show has effectively never been union, except for once and always, so that they could get Walter Jones back. So you don't have to pay actors union rates. You can pay them, like I said, literal pennies on the dollar to be on Power Rangers. And all those elements make the show feel very cheap. You can feel it when you're watching the show. Even in the best seasons, Power Rangers feels very cheap. Honestly, it's part of the reason I love it, but I totally understand why a general audience could be completely turned off by that. So from Hasbro's perspective, this needs to become something else in order for it to make us money. The first, I believe, Hasbro reboot that was reported on was a pitch to Paramount that would follow a new team of Power Rangers, time traveling back to the 1990s to team up with an original team of Power Rangers, maybe like a recasted MMPR. That sounded really interesting on paper. I don't think that's a great way to introduce Power Rangers to a general audience. It's sort of like if they made a Batman movie for the first time in 20 years about Terry McGinnis going back in time to hang out with Bruce Wayne. Okay, never mind. That sounds awesome. Get on it, DC, Warner Brothers. I know you're watching, but you get my point. It's sort of weird to reintroduce a concept like this through a time travel movie that is both like, here's the past and the future, but like general audiences are only sort of tangentially familiar with the past. After that, it was reported that Jonathan Entwistle, who's like a writer director in Hollywood and had done a bunch of stuff with Netflix, was spearheading this big reboot universe at Netflix, like original reboot universe. And Hasbro actually had like something of a production deal with Netflix at the time. Netflix, I believe, co-produced all of Beast Morphers, all of Dino Fury, to the point that Dino Fury Season 2 was Netflix exclusive. And then I know for a fact that Once and Always and Cosmic Fury were Netflix exclusive co-productions. And I think they might have put some money into Super Ninja Steel. I can't remember. You gotta understand, at the time, all of Power Rangers was on Netflix. And Netflix is sort of constantly on the hunt for original programming, and Power Rangers is so cheap that, like, literally putting any amount of money into it at the time was guaranteed return on investment for them. I'm pretty sure Once and Always was the most watched thing on Netflix the week it came out. And then Cosmic Fury beat those numbers. Like, Cosmic Fury, the week it came out, was the most watched thing on Netflix, period. I'm pretty sure. At the very least, on Netflix Kids. Unfortunately, that stalled out. I think Netflix changed some of its leadership around, or they just decided this is too expensive to put into, or decided that the Entwistle thing was just too expensive to put money into, which, again, I totally understand. From what I remember, the Entwistle reboot would have followed a Tommy Oliver-like figure joining a team with a female Red Ranger, and he was like the center of the universe, like the chosen one for Power Rangers. And the plan was to create a movie that would then spin off into a TV series. Again, I'm not like totally inherently against the idea. I think having a Tommy Oliver-esque character is probably a good way to get people to buy in. Again, not an idea I'm like inherently against. If anything, that probably would have worked better than the Paramount time travel movie thing. And then somewhere in there, I remember, like, very briefly, Netflix was flirting with the idea of doing a Mighty Morphin Power Rangers styled show. Like, very stripped down budget, like, superhero thing. Think Armor Sores. If anybody has seen Armor Sores, like that style of show. But presumably with, like, real sets and actual costumes. And, like, I hate to be that guy. I wouldn't be mad at it, but that's not what the show needed, right? As we'll talk about much later, Power Rangers needs to be completely different than what it is now for modern general audiences to buy in. And that is not the show that you make to get modern general audiences to buy in. And then most recently was this Disney Plus reboot that just got canceled. So clearly, somebody at Hasbro is attempting to make good on this $522 million investment that they made back in 2018. Yes, that is how much Hasbro paid Haim Saban for the Power Rangers license. But we live in a very different world than we did in 2018, and Power Rangers never escaped 1993. Power Rangers is like one of the most 90s things ever of all time. Like, it took all the things that people loved about the Karate Kid and Ninja Turtles and then merged it with, like, the up-and-coming anime dubbing scene and, like mecha stuff, and, like, oh, it's so great. I love Power Rangers so much. But yeah, it's, like, the perfect 90s franchise, to the point that, like, the rest of the decade until Pokemon came around was riddled with Power Rangers knockoffs and attempted spin-offs. VR Troopers, Big Bad Beetleborgs, Knights of Tiranogue, Masked Rider. Those are all the Saban production. Oh, and, like, TMNT Next Mutation. Power Rangers was a big deal in the 1990s. It was a instant smash hit, billions of dollars. They shut down a freeway, but the show never grew out of that. TV was very different in the 90s, especially kids' TV. Back when the show started, it was airing new episodes every day after school, and then reruns on Saturdays. That whole 5-part storyline, Green with Evil, aired one day after the other. Something I joke about all the time with my roommate is, can you imagine being the kid who is grounded the Monday that Tommy debuted? And then even sort of after that, when we started airing new episodes every week, TV just ran longer in the 2000s and the 2010s. All the Disney seasons are a little over 30 episodes. I think Mystic Force is the shortest with 32, and then like the average is like 36. Some of them are like 38, but none of them are 40. But that's a lot of episodes for one season of television, right? Like these things ran for forever. They aired 22 episodes over the course of several weeks, one new episode every week. And then because of that, Saban managed to get 2 seasons of Power Rangers out of 1 season of Super Sentai. But now TV is so different. Even kids' TV is different. I'm 22. Most people younger than me do not care about television at all. Most of what my generation watches is YouTube and Twitch and TikTok. We have largely left scripted behind, like as a concept. Like YouTube skits don't really exist anymore in the way that like Smosh did in the 2010s, because it's just not financially viable in the modern YouTube landscape. Most of my friends who do watch television watch older shows that are on streaming services because there's lots of episodes to have on as a second screen kind of thing. The Office, Criminal Minds, classic Star Trek, that's all stuff that I or people I know are really into. Ninjago. And that's because at a certain point in the 2010s, television changed forever. There were lots of warning signs for the complete and utter shift in television. Netflix as a streaming service started to catch on when I was a kid. My parents were very early adopters of the streaming service, and then a lot of people I knew had the Wii Netflix disc. And then because everybody had Prime shipping at the time, everybody also had Prime Video, right? Now, not everybody had stuff like Hulu, and then stuff like HBO Max and Paramount Plus didn't even exist at the time. But this idea of streaming shows and movies was becoming more and more normalized at the time. And then at the same time, premium television was getting easier to access. Before, channels like Showtime and HBO were really the only places that you could go for like movie quality television, which is such a weird thing to say. Like television was made to be cheap, and films were made to be expensive in a broad sense. I'm not saying you can't have a very cheap film. You get what I'm saying. Television has to be made cheaply because you have to fill out so many episodes over the course of however many weeks to satisfy the channels, the affiliates, the advertisers. There needs to be enough content on TV at all times, so there's enough time to run commercials all the time. That's why writer strikes were such a big deal, and why the invention of reality TV was such a big deal. But in the 2010s, AMC changed freaking everything. Mad Men, Breaking Bad, The Walking Dead. All on one channel. And these were all on basic cable. Famously, some of the best television of all time on basic cable. So then all the premium channels have to compete now, right? So HBO in 2011 debuts Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones was a movie every week. While the cast was not enormously famous at the time, you know what it was? Gigantic. There were a lot of main characters on this show, and there were swords, and there were dragons, and there was nudity. It was a ginormous crossover hit. Like, people who would never touch a fantasy anything loved this show. And it made a lot of money, and it cost a lot of money, so it was good that they made a lot of money. And because it was on HBO, a channel already sort of known for these miniseries and these lower episode counts, they got away with these shorter seasons. And so there's 2 things happening here. 1, streamers are becoming normalized. And 2, premium TV is becoming easier and easier to make. And so when those 2 paths converged, do you know what you got? Premium television on streaming services. The early Netflix originals, like House of Cards and Orange is the New Black, were pretty big hits. Stranger Things changed everything. Stranger Things, every season, was just an 8-hour movie. In the later seasons, it was like 10 to 12 hours. And so you can understand how difficult it must be to be Power Rangers at this point. Children are largely uninterested in television. The TV structure has changed in a way that does not favor you due to lower episode counts and higher required budgets, and you're not represented on any major streamers because no major studios own the Power Rangers IP. Power Rangers, as the show that we know it, was not built for this. And so in order for it to continue into the 2020s, it needed to be something completely different. And the 2 times it tried, it was wildly successful with the general audience. Power Rangers Cosmic Fury had its episode count cut in half due to budgetary reasons, meaning it was only 10 episodes long, and it was the most watched thing on Netflix Kids. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, Once and Always, while clearly an attempt at getting lapsed nostalgic fans back into the mix, was also hugely watched, and it was just this little 50-minute mini movie. But for many reasons, this was just not the vision of the Hasbro Corporation, or some fans, which we'll talk about later. And I get it, you want to do your own thing, and you want to make as much money as possible. The creatives want to put their own stamp on it, and the business side needs to make enough money to justify the existence of the project, and to do that, you need to sell merchandise and toys to people who don't like Power Rangers. And it doesn't help that while the entire TV landscape was changing, people were getting really sick of superheroes. When Power Rangers first hit the screens in 1993, it was not nearly as easy to see superheroes outside of comic books. The Fox Kids network was kind of the only place to see that stuff. X-Men the animated series, Spider-Man the animated series, Batman the animated series, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, all on the same network. And as the 90s ended and the 2000s started, thanks to things like the original X-Men and Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, superheroes and comic books started to enter the mainstream, started to become cool. And nothing represents the capstone for that more than the year 2008 with the release of Iron Man and The Dark Knight. While many very pedantic comic book fans like myself have reevaluated Christopher Nolan's Batman series in the last couple of years, it is indisputable those movies, especially the second one, The Dark Knight, changed the way people look at comic book movies as properties. And Iron Man is the movie that launched 1,000 spin-offs, the start of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Suddenly, superheroes were not part of the culture, they were the culture. In the 2010s, pretty much every studio was trying to get their hands on some marketable, superhero-esque universe that they could turn into a cinematic universe like Marvel. From like 2014 to 2016-17, that was everything. Marvel was everywhere. It was so prevalent that Disney started to treat Star Wars like Marvel, with all these spin-offs and sequels and prequels trying to expand the Star Wars universe. Which, hey, this is not a video about me talking about Star Wars. The point is that superheroes were everywhere, and this culminated in 2019 with the release of Avengers Endgame and the closing of, for many people, the Marvel story. Endgame largely wraps up the major character arcs of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, bringing both Iron Man and Captain America's character arcs to a close. A studio has to make movies, and they have to make money. And the Marvel movies were making money, so they kept going after their reported ending in Endgame. And around the same time, DC was really trying to lock in on their DC Extended Universe, which, after a lot of other stuff, eventually became the DC Universe, led by James Gunn and Peter Safran. And so there were a lot of superhero movies coming out from like 2012 to 2023. And the unfortunate thing is, they might have oversaturated the market. Superheroes went from something that was special to see, to something that was normal to see, to something that was exhausting to see for a lot of people. A superhero movie started to become a sign of a lack of quality, especially how quickly they came out. You know, post-COVID, effects weren't looking that great. Martin Scorsese, around this time, famously said, superhero movies are not cinema, they are more like roller coaster rides, which is his opinion. But a lot of people latched onto that and started to draw this line in the sand as to what is and is not cinema, and superhero movies were deemed not cinema. This phenomena that many people were experiencing came to be known as superhero fatigue. Now, I personally do not think most people suffer from superhero fatigue. If the last couple of years have taught us anything, I think it's that people suffer from both a quality fatigue and just general rising costs in going to the movie theaters. We'll start with quality, then we'll talk about rising costs, and then obviously all this relates back to Power Rangers, I promise. Post-COVID, many superhero movies had many problems. On script levels, on effects levels, on directorial levels, just everything was kind of falling apart for a minute there. I believe on the Marvel side, the reason for this was that Disney was demanding more output than they could realistically fulfill, something that Kevin Feige has seemed to be working to correct. And on the DC side, it's because the Warner Brothers leadership at the time didn't know what they wanted. And then The Rock tried to take over, and then James Gunn came in, and now we're here, right? But people don't want to spend good money on a bad movie. And in an age where it is becoming more and more expensive to go to the theaters, seeing a just okay movie isn't really an option. 2026 has been the biggest box office year since COVID. And if we look at the highest earners for this year, things like Spider-Man, Project Hail Mary, The Odyssey, Mario Brothers, Obsession, we see three big trends emerging in Hollywood. One, incredibly high quality adaptations of classic properties. Two, big budget and fun family movies. And 3, passion projects by brilliant creators. Bonus points if the creators are particularly young. Because of how expensive going to the movies is, especially on a concessions level, when people go, they need it to be an event. There's a reason things like Barbenheimer was such a big deal, because they felt like once-in-a-lifetime events that you wanted to be there for. So how does this relate to Power Rangers? Well, for one, the very first time that a big budget Power Rangers reboot was presented to the modern audience was in 2017. Now, regardless on how you feel about this movie, it was not set up to succeed at all. For context, let me read you the other superhero movies that came out in 2017. The Lego Batman movie, Logan, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Wonder Woman, Transformers The Last Knight, Spider-Man Homecoming, Thor Ragnarok. You're kidding, right? That was the competition? And a Star Wars movie came out this same year. Of course, nobody saw that movie. There were a million other things to go see. Things that were vastly more culturally relevant at the time. And it has only gotten worse now. If you want to look at how a modern Power Rangers movie would do in the theaters, look no further than Masters of the Universe. 2026's Masters of the Universe is a movie that I really loved. It was fun. It had incredible action. The sets were awesome. The effects were great. But it was not a hit at the box office. As much as I'd like to blame one very specific person for this, there's definitely more contributing factors than just Jared Leto. The truth is, you can't just make a just okay superhero movie anymore. The movie has to be an event, or it has to be spectacularly made. Look at Superman from last year. That's a movie that I think was spectacularly made, and it made a pretty modest $600 million. And that's really not a lot when you look at the budget and estimated advertising costs of the movie, but I imagine they made it back in things like merch and HBO Max subscriptions, I guess. That feels like a movie that was built to make lifelong fans, which I hope it did. Look at this year's Spider-Man Brand New Day, a movie that does both. It feels like an event, and it was really well made. And it's going to make $2 billion. At the end of the year, we'll get Avengers Doomsday. Well, you know, the quality of the movie is up in the air. It does feel like an event. It's an Avengers movie. The last time we had a proper Avengers movie was 7 years ago. Unfortunately, not even really excellent movies are immune to failing at the box office. Thunderbolts is a really excellent movie that performed terribly. Luckily, the director gets to try again with X-Men, but you can't just make a pretty okay Power Rangers movie. Power Rangers would have to either A, be a masterpiece, which feels very unlikely, or B, would have to feel like an event. And let's be real, Power Rangers will never feel like an event. Alright, the camera had to charge last night. Something's wrong with my battery. It will not get up to full. So we're back doing this on another day. And also, I'm having Wi-Fi issues, so my script is completely down because I read everything on Google Docs. So we're going off of memory, and we're talking purely out of our butts until this camera dies again, because it's got half battery, and I charged it for 8 hours last night. So what are we going to do? It's good, though, because I got to some time off, and I got to think about the segments I had recorded that you're not seeing in this video, and I decided to take them out because they were very negative in ways that I didn't want them to be. Retry. Take like 3 or 4. Right? I got to get out of the way and say it here. I love Tokusatsu. Power Rangers was like a gateway drug for me to Super Sentai, Kamen Rider, Ultraman, Godzilla, all that other fun stuff. And I have like a real deep love and admiration for those things. But it's no secret that Tokusatsu, in the general consciousness, is largely looked down on. I mean, the joke about the Green Goblin from the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies looking like a Power Ranger has been going since before I was born. Which, by the way, that looks nothing like a Power Ranger. Maybe a Power Rangers monster? Like, very vaguely, but these two things do not correlate in any way, except for he wears a helmet and is green. Part of the reason Power Rangers has had such a hard time over the last 30 years is that, from an outsider's perspective looking in, it is just a very silly kid show. A lot of that has to do with presentation, and a lot of that presentation is the Sentai footage.
I need a new customers! Right on time!
You know, I've had just about enough pepperoni mushrooms today.
We're here to toss your salad.
Which, taken in a vacuum, to a layman who doesn't have any appreciation for the level of filmmaking involved in creating Tokusatsu, I mean, I'm sorry, it just looks silly.
Don't cry! It's only onions! Then green peppers, mushrooms, and a pepperoni! And the secret to a great pizza, more cheese!
And for some of us, that's part of the reason we love it, right? But for most people, that's a turnoff. And so I think it's strange that for a lot of people, their plan for getting Power Rangers back on TV is to just go back to adapting Sentai footage. First of all, we're running out of like usable footage. There's also the idea that they could take whatever Project Red becomes and adapt that into Power Rangers, taking something like Gavin Infinity. Maybe you could tie it into Captain Chaku from Beast Morphers. The thing with that is, in 1993, Haim Saban fleeced Toei for everything they're worth. In case you don't know, in the contract for the master license of Power Rangers, it's built in that whoever owns it basically owns the international rights to Super Sentai, everything outside of Asia. That means Toei can't like just dub or sub anything and bring it over here the same way that they can Kamen Rider. They legally are not allowed to. So if we were to reapproach Toei and try and acquire the rights to Project Red internationally, I find it very unlikely that they would agree to it, or at the very least, it wouldn't be nearly as lucrative as the Power Rangers contract was back in the 90s and continues to be now. They would probably demand more control over the thing. They would probably even just do it themselves at this point because they, like I said, they got fleeced for 30 years straight. Like that's not cool. The unfortunate truth is, in a lot of ways, Sentai held back Power Rangers from having a much larger cultural impact because that footage is shot with a Japanese audience in mind. And if you've ever watched anime, then you know how completely different the Japanese sense of what is cool and what is not cool and humor and all this other stuff is from the American view. So yes, an incredibly niche group of Americans like it, but America as a whole would largely be turned off by Power Rangers returning to the same thing it's done for 30 years. And that's the other thing, is Power Rangers did adapt Super Sentai for 30 years straight. And guess what? It didn't work. The show's off the air. A lot of people seem to have the mindset of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, which I totally agree with. But adapting a Sentai season every year was broken. Now, that's not to say that Power Rangers needs to become the MCU. Honestly, I'm sure there's a middle ground between Tokusatsu and Marvel movie that we could happily reach. But Super Sentai is not coming to save us. It couldn't even save itself without Power Rangers. And before Hasbro can do anything to make Power Rangers a big name brand, they need to win over the general American audience. You need to win over middle schoolers and high schoolers and college people, people who make online edits of their favorite characters and write fan fiction. Look at Ninjago or Sonic or Ninja Turtles. These are all things that are built for kids but have huge adult audiences too. And we'll talk about that later when I explain to Hasbro how we need to continue to move forward here. But just one last thing before we move on from the Super Sentai thing. The two really big projects from the Hasbro era, Once and Always and Power Rangers Cosmic Fury, were mostly not Sentai adaptations. Cosmic Fury has basically no on-the-ground footage. It's just the Zord fights from Q Ranger. And Once and Always has literally zero Sentai footage in it. And guess what? Both of those things were massive hits for Netflix. Power Rangers has the potential to be its own brand, separate from Super Sentai. It's just going to take a creative who is passionate about this stuff to carry that forward. It was in this next part of the video that I really crashed out really hard, and then I couldn't keep recording. So we're going to try and be nice now. I think the Power Rangers fanbase and the Tokusatsu fanbase as a whole is really fractured in a way that I've only ever seen with Star Wars fans. Dawson Rider has some great videos on this, but just to boil it down, it seems like a lot of Tokusatsu people hate Power Rangers. And it seems like within that subset, a lot of Power Rangers people hate each other. It doesn't help that our entire fan base has been fractured into pretty much 4 big eras of the show. The Saban seasons, the Disney seasons, the Neo Saban seasons, and then the Hasbro seasons. But even within that, it's like, oh, you like Overdrive over Jungle Fury? Yourself. There's people complaining about the Playmates toys, even though they're not really for them. It's for a kid audience. Lots of people have a problem with the over-reliance on Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, even though, as has been said many times, most people don't remember that the show made it out of 1995. It's like the Pokemon thing, where every Pokemon is somebody's favorite, but the general audiences only know, the original 151, and then the ones with the most hype and aura. Mighty Morphin is the original 151, and then Tommy Oliver is hype and aura. Like I said, there's people demanding that they keep adapting Super Sentai, and then people like me saying that they need to leave Sentai behind and do their own thing. That's its own conversation. And so if I was a creative, or even just a business person at Hasbro, I'd look at all this and I'd say, well, what do they want? It's sort of the same problem that the DC movies had for a long time, where there were some people who wanted them to be more like the Marvel movies, and then other people who wanted them to lean really hard into the Zack Snyder thing. And that fracturing of the fan base, that indecision from all of us and from general consumers, led to the DCEU as we knew it before it died. Incredibly confused projects that were clearly dragged through development hell and ultimately laid to rest for something completely different. Power Rangers fans gotta find some common ground, because at this point, we have failed in telling the people in charge what we as an audience want. I changed cameras. My camera, I don't know what's wrong with it. All right, for this part, I'm done talking to the fans, largely, but they're welcome to stay. I kind of want to talk to Hasbro and about Hasbro. Hasbro, over the last 8 years since they acquired the Power Rangers license, has changed a lot. Under Brian Goldner, they were a toy company first, with a production branch, E1, that created entertainment based around their properties to sell toys. But under Chris Cox, Hasbro has become a licensing company. They are a corporation that owns a lot of IP and are willing to license it out to other people for a fee so that those people can make products based on their IP. This is how we got the Playmates Power Rangers toys. They also shut down Entertainment One or E1 or whatever it was called. So they no longer have their own first party production branch. It's just them going to other people or other people coming to them. And when you're a licenser, you don't want to be going to other people. You want to be in demand. And so it's not surprising that the thing that killed the most recent Power Rangers reboot at Disney Plus was budgetary. Disney Plus is largely changing its strategy around original content. And so for them to foot the bill for an incredibly expensive superhero action show for an IP that they don't own, when they own Marvel and Star Wars, which are infinitely larger than Power Rangers, it just doesn't make good business sense. And from what I understand at Hasbro, nobody knows what to do with the brand. Brian Goldner was a close personal friend of Haim Saban and largely bought it under the table without anybody knowing about it at the company. This is a brand that, for the last 8 years, everybody who's owned it and worked on it is completely unfamiliar with it, which is silly because they've owned it for almost a decade, and you'd think it's their jobs to turn these IPs into money, but whatever. Being a big licensor is probably hugely lucrative for Hasbro at this point because they get to create products based around their IPs without paying any of the production costs. It's like just infinite return on investment at this point. But that also means they're not willing to foot the bill for something like a live action Power Rangers show on Disney Plus. And if Disney's not going to do it, that money has to come from somewhere. And guess what? If there's no money, there's no show. So, all right, I'm talking to Hasbro now. You clearly don't know what to do with the brand, and that's fine. I don't expect everybody to be a massive Power Rangers fan since birth like I was. What do you do with something like Power Rangers? Power Rangers is such an enigma because on paper, it is sort of the perfect franchise. There's an infinite number of color-coded superheroes, all of which wear helmets, so you can't see any of their faces. It could be literally anybody under there in the same way that Spider-Man could be anybody. And they're intergalactic warriors that fight aliens, demons, ninjas, criminals from the future, more aliens, mad scientists, more aliens, criminals from space who are also aliens. Okay, it's been a lot of aliens, but you get what I'm saying. The Power Rangers mythos is vast. They all have secret identities and are usually teens or young people, and they pilot giant robots. And they all have unique weapons and motifs that belong solely to them, but then contribute to the larger whole of their team, which then contributes to the larger whole of the entire mythos. It's like if Spider-Man and Voltron had a baby and it was raised by Sailor Moon. There was so much potential there, but due to its public reception, as we've talked about, it's really hard to get normal people on board. So what do you do with something like Power Rangers? Now, I'm not going to sit here and give out all my greatest ideas to the Power Rangers mythos. I would like to be a screenwriter at some point, and in the world of creativity, your ideas are your currency. So if any production companies are listening and they want to hear my pitch for Power Rangers, hit me up. I do want to talk to some of the things that some other people have said. This is like largely one of the few things that Power Rangers fans can actually agree on, so here we go. First of all, the obvious answer is an animated series, or anime, as a lot of people have said. I think a lot of people are picturing Power Rangers meets Invincible, which I'm not inherently against. There's an especially large contingent of the fandom that want adaptations of Kyle Higgins' Power Rangers comics, which again, I'm not inherently against. But I think a lot of people just say these things and then never explain why that would work. So Hasbro, if you're listening, here's why I think that would work. Number one, despite the good work of the Spider-Verse films, animation is still seen as largely a for kids medium. It's looked down upon. A lot of times they're seen as side projects. I mean, just look at Marvel. They have 2 seasons of X-Men 97 out, and they just announced the real X-Men for the X-Men movies. So you can have this animated Power Rangers project on the side, which can be completely different from the show and convert some non-Power Rangers fans into Power Rangers fans very easily. Now, me personally, I'm picturing less Invincible and more My Adventures with Superman, heavily anime inspired, taking a lot of the cues from the Power Rangers mythos and modernizing them for normal people, while still keeping the fun spirit of the thing. Some other examples of, like, animated shows that I think would be good inspirations are, like, Spectacular Spider-Man and Batman Beyond. That sort of, like, teen angst, teen drama, built into your superhero cartoon. And as for adapting the comics, the Power Rangers comics are largely the only thing that has ever taken the franchise seriously.
Now is the time to heat things up. Use my colossal cooker for 10 minutes, and you're gonna have a beautiful, cheesy, deep dish of Power Rangers pizza.
All the writers, but primarily Kyle Higgins and Ryan Parrott, treated that mythos with such sincerity that the Power Rangers comics are sort of their own thing. There are real emotional stakes and real character arcs in those books in a way that at least Mighty Morphin Power Rangers never really hit. And it all culminates in this huge Avengers Endgame style event, Shattered Grid. And there was stuff after Shattered Grid, but that was largely the ending to Kyle's run, which I think by most people is seen as like the main story. But Hasbro, if you don't know what to do with the brand, this gives you a sort of blueprint to work off of, is these comic books. Hugely popular with Power Rangers fans, and something that non-Power Rangers fans could get into pretty easily. One of my favorite Tokutubers is Hercules, and something that he's pitched a couple times before is a children's animated series. Now, I'll let him pitch his own show to Hasbro, but the sentiment of what he's saying is there should be a for preschool age kids animated series that explores the wider history of the Power Rangers. That is not meant for people like me, who are diehard, lifelong, old Power Rangers fans, but for kids who have never heard of Power Rangers and are willing to learn. If anything, I think this is useful because it gets kids off of YouTube and watching something that is scripted and structured and can teach them something rather than just like flashing colors all the time like Cocomelon. And kids are the ones with the deep pockets. Parents will shell out a lot of money, especially during birthdays and holidays, to get those Power Rangers toys if their kids are really into Power Rangers. Speaking anecdotally, I got into the Marvel Universe through a show like this, the Superhero Squad show. A lot of my love for the less popular Marvel characters came directly from that show. And so if you can create a show like that, that gives kids an appreciation for the wider universe, then you've created lifelong fans, which is a problem that Power Rangers has always had, is that every year it reinvents itself for a new batch of kids while never doing anything to nurture the old kids. Marvel and DC don't have this problem. You start off watching the cartoons for kids, and then you go on to watch the movies and TV for young adults. There's a direct through line from something like Batwheels to Batman Brave and the Bold to Batman the Animated Series to The Batman. Power Rangers has never had that. And so that's what Hasbro has to create, is this pipeline that can keep people watching at all ages. I think whatever form the show comes back in needs to abandon this new year, new Rangers mindset. I think there's a reason that people before my time still only think of Power Rangers as Mighty Morphin, and that's because the show was on for 3 years and then had a big budget movie. And I think the reason my generation is so obsessed with Power Rangers Samurai is because, first of all, it was the first Power Ranger show that was airing on a network that we could actually see, but also because the show lasted for 2 years. We got 2 years to sit with those characters. Whatever the next version of Power Rangers ends up being, you need to stick with those characters for like 3 or 4 years at minimum, which, yes, TV doesn't really last that long anymore. That's a whole conversation that we just had. But look at shows like Cobra Kai. That show lasted for 4 years on Netflix, 2 years on YouTube. And Stranger Things released 5 seasons in 10 years. And that gave time for people to latch onto these characters, to become emotionally invested and connected with them in a way that you largely just can't with other shows. So, Hasbro, whatever the next Power Rangers thing is, the narrative needs to continue over multiple years. And when somebody leaves a team or gets a new power-up or a new color, that should be a big deal. I should hear on Twitter people talking about the Green Ranger becoming the White Ranger, because that's how you get people engaged, is meaningful change to characters over time. That's why TV is so different from movies. A movie is a snapshot, while TV is a life. I want to conclude this segment with, do not just give it to the fans. A mindset I see a lot in online spaces when a favorite property is being handled poorly by the people in charge of it is to just give it to the fans. The fans know exactly what they want. They'll do it perfect. That is not true, especially for this fandom. There are a lot of really talented Power Rangers creators out there making incredible fan projects. Power Rangers Unworthy is basically an episode of Power Rangers. Like, it has the same level of budget and production level. It's just written incredibly well. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the audio drama, is one of my favorite things to listen to, like, all the time, always. The key is to not give it to the fans. As we've already talked about, they're incredibly fractured. They have no idea what they want. The key is to give Power Rangers to a fan who is incredibly creative and passionate. A lot of the people who have worked on the Power Rangers reboots, people like Entwistle and the Percy Jackson showrunners, are hired guns. These are people brought in because they have a pitch on Power Rangers, they have thoughts, or they've created other projects in similar veins that could translate well to Power Rangers. Rangers. And I'm not trying to take shots at these people. Everybody's got to eat. But it's very telling that when the plug gets pulled on these projects, these people never talk about Power Rangers again, right? If you want Power Rangers to succeed, you need somebody like Kevin Feige, who loves the source material and also is willing to completely flip it and change it on its head. Somebody who is completely willing to dedicate their entire lives to this. You know, Kevin Feige has pretty much only worked on Marvel movies since he's been in Hollywood. That's why he's the Marvel guy, because he was so incredibly dedicated to this one thing. You need somebody like that. So no, don't just give it to the fans. Give it to a set of fans who are creatives, who are writers and artists and have ideas on how to run this franchise in a way that is different from the way it's been run. Because like I said, ideas are your currency, and most fans do not have a lot of currency. That's why the fan projects that stand out so well. My freshman year of college was the same year that Power Rangers died. The death of my childhood happened in two very specific ways. I moved out of my parents' house and started living on my own, largely. I still go home for summers, but you know. And also the show that had been a friend to me my entire life went away. And that was a hard thing to realize semi-recently. And it's even harder when you see the corpse of this friend being puppeted around and teased at you that they might come back to life. The thing is, we never got the chance to mourn Power Rangers properly. Like I said before, the show had a lot of brushes with death over its 30-year run, and it just kept going like an unstoppable juggernaut. And so a lot of us, including me, cannot picture a world where there isn't Power Rangers. And I think we might have to, at least for a little while. There's two ways that Power Rangers can go now. It has a huge Yu-Gi-Oh fork in the road here. One, it can stay out of the public consciousness long enough for people to miss it, and long enough for a creative who is passionate about the project to come in and flip it on its head. Think about Transformers. After the 80s, the show was kind of forgotten. It was a huge side project. You know, they still made toys and all that stuff, but it was not the cultural juggernaut that it was in the 80s, largely thanks to stuff like Ninja Turtles and Power Rangers. But then in 2007, Michael Bay drops Transformers, and suddenly Transformers is a household name again. The other way is the way of Masters of the Universe. Masters of the Universe, like Transformers, was a huge 80s property, but never really made it out of the 80s in any successful way. Sure, there was that Netflix reboot that people didn't like, and the She-Ra reboot was huge for a very specific set of people. But has any of that translated to Masters of the Universe having its own Transformers-style comeback? No, not really. Like I said, the movie was good, but it didn't perform well. And that's indicative of what audiences want. You can't just make a pretty good action movie anymore based on a kid's property. It just doesn't happen. It has to be stellar. And also it has to not have Jared Leto in it. So those are the two ways that Power Rangers can go. We can either continue to try and milk it for all it's worth before eventually Hasbro just locks it in a vault forever, or we can sit with our grief and we can mourn our friend, and we can wait long enough to miss it. And then when somebody who is willing to stick it out comes in and brings it back, it can be special. Because Power Rangers is special. There is literally nothing like it. There's a reason that when people see Tokusatsu in the wild, they go, is this Japanese Power Rangers? It's because it sticks with people, even if they don't know it. This show should have never worked for as long as it did, and it just kept going. I love Power Rangers. It's my favorite thing, maybe ever. There are characters I appreciate more, people like Superman and Spider-Man, and I am incredibly passionate about my own ideas, about writing for myself, but few pieces of media have affected me as deeply as Power Rangers. I do not want it to just go away and die. But after 4 or 5 attempted reboots in the last 3 years, it might be time, at least temporarily, to let it go. We have to be okay with Power Rangers not being around, so that when it comes back, we can greet it with open arms. That got more emotional than I thought it was going to. If you like this video, like, comment, share, subscribe. I don't know if I'm going to talk about Tokusatsu again. I probably will. Probably not to this degree, but, you know. I also have a podcast. You can find my podcast link down below. Barrier to entry. I do it with my brother and my friend, and we're having a great time. Otherwise, I will see you later. Bye.
Goodness. Good to see you.
Get away from my pizza!